morning. I'm going to get us going into our second session. My name is Robert Holman. I am the founder and CEO of Glassdoor, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you today. Thank you for coming to Recruit 2018. So I'm an engineer. I'm a software engineer. In fact, that's where I started. That's how I was trained. That is actually, I would say, my heart and soul. I build software. I built part of Glassdoor. I started my career in Windows at Microsoft way back in the day. And if you would have asked me, I would have told you that engineering is the heart and soul of a company, especially a tech company. That's what we do. We build what the company ships, and we actually power what the company puts out into the world. After spending 10 years with you all, you've sufficiently disabused me of that notion, and I have come to fully understand that any company, no matter what you do, and particularly tech companies, particularly companies that create intellectual capital, are fueled, yes, by technology, but that technology gets created by people. And at the end of the day, and I have yet to find a company that is not fueled by the people that are brought into its walls and are not made or broken by the quality of those people, how they're nurtured, how they're grown, how they're recruited, sustained, and led. And as a result, I think I've gotten an early seat, and I've come to understand what corporate America is really just now beginning to deeply understand, which is that HR really is the strategic heart of most companies, if not all companies. And it's going through a renaissance period where as that has become well known, and as frankly the economy has gotten tighter and it's harder and harder to hire, it's become clear, and the pain is becoming real, that if this function is not functioning extremely well, a company will suffer. And perhaps it's time to really focus on what a 21st century HR leadership and team looks like. And that's really what today is about, and I'm excited to be here and share that with you. Okay, so few companies have mastered this craft better than Amazon. And I'm very excited about this morning's guest because she is responsible for a large portion of that success. Amazon probably, if you think about it, has one of the most diversified workforces on the planet. They hire actors, they hire engineers, they hire a lot of warehouse workers, they hire a lot of fulfillment people, they hire drivers, and the skill sets are incredibly diverse, and yet they've managed to keep them engaged, passionate, and aligned around a central core of principles, which I think is absolutely fascinating. So I'm excited to have Ardeen Williams, Amazon's Vice President of Worldwide People Operations, join us today for this fireside chat. Amazon's been at Amazon for 4 years. She actually came off of the bench from retirement to go to Amazon for this job. So we're going to talk a little bit about what can actually make someone come out of retirement. In her role, though, she oversees a workforce of about 100,000 people at Amazon. Absolutely massive. And before her current role, she was head of recruiting for Amazon's cloud services, AWS. Before that, she was at Intel, where she actually was part of their investment division, Intel Capital, before being convinced to take a try in HR. And I think that's also a fascinating story that maybe, hopefully, we'll get time to talk about. And before that, she came out of the Army, where she was part of the Army, Signal Corps, which I think you'll see really kind of continues to run through her the discipline that she learned in that space. So please join me in a warm welcome for Ardeen Williams, and let's get started on this.
Thank you.
I got this feeling inside my bones.
Okay, so what makes a happily retired executive come off the bench and into the heart and fire of something like Amazon?
You know, first I think and my husband always says I'm not allowed to retire again until I decide what I'm going to retire to. And I think that that's important. It's like any other job change, is you need to be going to something. I was sitting in Palm Springs with my feet up, enjoying the sunset, and got a call from a headhunter. And I always talk to headhunters. I think it's good practice because my philosophy is I trade a day of my life for every day I come to work. And it forces me to go through the thinking about, why am I doing what I'm doing? Is this really worth that calculus? And she said, hey, I've got this job. And I said, look, I'm looking out at the San Jacinto Mountains. I'm sipping a martini. I'm not going back to work. I'll share my Rolodex with you. And she said, what? For those of you, who are, like me, a woman of a certain age, that'll resonate. And she said, it's Amazon Web Services. And I set down my glass because I knew from my days in the venture world that AWS was really redefining a business model. They were changing capital to expense, pay as you go, and as Robert pointed out earlier when we spoke, it was also about that ability for an entrepreneur to innovate, to very quickly have an idea, build the solution, go to bed, wake up and see if it worked, and if it didn't, tear it down and rebuild it. And I wanted to be part of that change. I thought, that could be really fun to do.
Yeah, it's incredible. Talk to us about what it's like to hire at Amazon right now. So unemployment's at an all-time low. We're at 3.9% right now. I think all of us in this room are probably struggling to hire for a variety of roles. You've got an absolute mountain of people that you're hiring. Maybe you have an edge because you're Amazon, I kind of feel like, but I'm curious, how you think about that and what you're facing.
So if anybody's got tips, I'm happy to take them too. I think that this is a market that's really, it's interesting, we're hitting this level of unemployment now that's really forcing each of us to think differently about talent pipelines and talent pools. I suspect that any entity with brand recognition does have a little bit of an advantage because there's that click-through piece. I think for us, though, it's really about finding candidates that are a good cultural fit, about people who will thrive in the environment, who like to dig in and get their hands dirty, who are comfortable with ambiguity, who have that bias for action and want to solve problems. So it's really about finding that cultural fit and making sure that we are tapping into some of those pipelines where we may not have traditionally looked. And I think that's true for all of us. We're really starting to look at where are those pockets of talent where there has been a higher residual rate of unemployment.
Amazon is founded on these fairly well-known core leadership principles: customer obsession, passion for invention, commitment to operational excellence, and long-term thinking. Mm-hmm. How do you drive those into an organization of 100,000 people as diverse as truck drivers and warehouse workers to actors? And how do you do it?
It all starts with recruiting. It starts with the people in the room here. It's how do we select for that? How do we bring people in and assess their fit with the culture? And if we do that right, then we've set the table. And then the next piece is how do we help people grow in that environment and get comfortable taking risks, get comfortable making decisions. And one of the early things that I learned was this concept of a one-way door versus a two-way door. I was working on a problem with an attorney, and we were going to change the Amazon.com/jobs website. And we got the solution up. It was kind of scrappy. And then I spent like 3 weeks trying to figure out who had to approve it. And I was really frustrated. It's like, who's going to approve this? And finally, somebody pulled me aside and said, what are you doing, Ardeen? Why is this taking so long? And I said, well, I don't know who to get to approve this. And
no one here knows what you're talking about. I could hear the snickering in the room.
and he said, who told you that it needed to be approved? And I thought, well, that's a good question. And I said, well, no one. And he said, why? He said, are you afraid that you're going to fail? And it was this really it felt like a really personal question. It was. And I said, well, yeah. What if I got it wrong? I mean, it is the .com jobs website. And he said, is it reversible? And I said, what do you mean? He said, is it a one-way door or a two-way door? If you make this decision and you screwed it up, can you change it? And I said, well, yeah. He said, it's a two-way door. He said, push the button, Ardeen. And I have to tell you that reaching out and clicking that mouse was one of the hardest things I've done in my career because it forced me to make that decision and put myself out there without the safety of kind of an MRC or a governing body or a steering committee to approve the change. And the good news is I didn't get fired, so I think it turned out okay.
Yeah. I don't know if Bezos was the first person to articulate this one-way versus two-way door thing. He was the first time I had heard it, but it is incredibly freeing it's a great framework. And for those of you who don't, just clarify it one more time, what it basically is, his hypothesis, or whoever it is, says basically there's two types of decisions. There's some decisions where like once you make them, there's really no going back. And there's some decisions which are basically when you make them, you can just walk right back through the door if you're wrong. And I think he argues the second ones you should make very quickly and with relative, do the best you can, but do them quickly. And the first are the ones you should agonize on.
right.
Maybe you can elaborate on that. How does he talk about it?
That's exactly right. It's how do you make the decision in the absence of a complete data set? The enemy of done is better. I need more data. I need more data. And one of the most powerful questions that I've been asked is, how would you make the decision different? What data would you need to change your mind on the decision? And invariably, when I'm looking for more data, there really isn't. I think I'm just sort of trying to get from that, yeah, I've got enough, until I'm not just sure, I'm really, really sure. And so it really is how do you get comfortable failing fast, but doing it in a way where you're making an informed decision, and then clearly understanding if you do have to roll back or change your direction, how are you going to do that?
Okay, talk to me about coming out of the Army into Intel. No, Hewlett-Packard, you were a product manager first, but then Intel. What did the Army do for you? And talk to me about that.
Well, the Army got me through school, which was incredibly important, because I wouldn't be where I'm at today without that. And I also, I tell people the best decision I made was joining the Army, and the second best decision I made was getting out. I had the privilege of being trained as a leader in probably one of the most experientially based leadership programs in the world. And it made me, people view the Army as, oh, it's the military, people do what you tell them to do. But the reality is you're trained and you're leading a group of people and you're asking them to put themselves in harm's way. And people aren't going to follow you if they don't trust you, if they don't believe that you're willing to do more than your fair share of the task, and if you're not honest and direct, and if you don't stand up and act like you're comfortable when things are pretty ambiguous. And so I think those are the things that I took away from it.
Yeah, that resonates. All right, the workforce is changing. There's no doubt about it. Technology's embedded deeper and deeper. Since you do hire so many people of varied skill levels, how are you preparing them? How do you think about that? And I think many of us are dealing with that, is basically how do we prepare our workforces for what we don't even know quite what the future is going to look like over the next 5 or 10 years, but it's almost certainly going to be pretty different than what it is now?
I think that there's the first piece, and it comes back again to that core of, are you recruiting people that are a good fit for your culture? We have this concept of bar raising. Are the people we're hiring better than 50% of the people we already have? And that's kind of a scary proposition for managers.
Say that one more time.
Hiring people who are better than 50% of your population. And we do that, so we use behavioral interviewing. It's based on our leadership principles. We also have another concept, and this is out on the Amazon website. You can go read more about it. But we have this concept of a bar raiser. And that bar raiser is a neutral third party. So it's someone who's not, so if I'm hiring, it's someone who's not in my direct chain of authority or chain of command. And on that interview panel, that bar raiser's job is to facilitate the debrief, and he or she can trump my vote and can say, you know what, I'm not comfortable that this candidate is raising the bar. And that's important in a fast-growing business. Or if I've had for example, I'm working to fill a role right now, frankly, that I'm wrestling with, because I'm looking for a skill set that's in hot demand. It's, the market's tight, just like all of you are dealing with. And we go through the debrief, and it's really easy to get caught up in the, you know what, this is going to be okay. I'm just going to compromise. And it's that bar raiser who nudges me and says, no, this isn't what you're looking for. This isn't what we're going to do. And I think that rigor and making sure that we are in fact hiring that population is important, because it sets the foundation for what we're going to do moving forward.
Yeah. I worked at Microsoft in my early part of my career, and they had the same concept. There was this person that was always outside the group and basically they were assessing for cultural fit, but what they were really doing was an uninterested third party who was basically saying, does this person fit? And I found too that the most powerful thing about that role was the 1 out of 50 times that they said, no, this person doesn't fit, because it was a stark reminder to the interview loop, and it shook them out of that phase that they were in.
Where we talked ourselves into something.
Yeah, you talk yourself into something, and someone else says basically, what do you, yeah.
They're the
And
backstop.
trumps the interview loop, and I think it is absolutely it's powerful and fascinating. So Amazon operates in, I don't even know how many countries, a lot of countries. How do you, I think one of the things we struggle with, I'm sure many of you struggle with, is how do you build one culture, one company culture across so many diverse cultures, and how do you project the same set of leadership principles across such a diverse workforce?
So I think I'm going to paint everyone with the same brush.
And do you adapt them, I guess, would be the question. The second subtext is, are they a little different in some countries?
Not intentionally, no, we don't adapt them. And I think it comes back to, again, hiring for leadership principles. Our performance assessments are based on those leadership principles. And then as we grow and we build tech hubs, for example, one of the key practices for us is making sure that we are seeding that site with experienced Amazonians. Because it's tough to develop a culture and to grow a culture if you have a bunch of people who don't know what it looks like in practice. And so seeding those sites is important. And then being very clear with people what those leadership principles look like in practice, and how we live them.
Okay. There's a phrase at Amazon that we've heard anyway, that it's always day one.
Yeah.
A, what does that mean? And B, how do you do it?
So it's always day one. It really harkens back to that, and as an entrepreneur, you can appreciate that scrappy day where it's like, okay, can I make the cash flow work? How do I get the product out? What's the minimum lovable product that I can put out there? And one of my favorite questions is what would it take? Right? Because you'll get it from a team. Hey, we can't deliver this, Ardeen. We can't do it. And it's like, okay, what would it take? How can we do a scrappy implementation or MacGyver it? And I think it gets really, it's the bigger you get, the worry is that we become complacent and that we sit back and we say, we're going to get to the 99.99% solution rather than putting something out there. And what I'd tell you in my experience in AWS that was really intriguing was watching the tech teams, and they'd put a service out there that they weren't extraordinarily comfortable, was fully baked, but then entrepreneurs and companies would experiment with it, and they'd come back and say, wow, this is great, but you should do X or Y, or boy, this is really bad, and I don't know why you guys put it out there. And again, back to that putting yourself out and taking that risk, that feedback then created a far better product and really created the environment where it was not only okay, but expected to do that. Yeah. To really experiment and behave as if this were a startup. Because frankly, AWS was a startup within a much bigger company.
Okay, I think a lot of people in the audience say, that's all well and good when Jeff Bezos is your top boss. And he's espoused that, there's we want you to behave this way. But if I'm, a young leader in a company that maybe isn't as far forward in their thinking as Bezos, how do I drive change like that? How do I take risks? What's the smart way to do that?
So it's a great question. I would tell you that Intel had a far lower risk tolerance just by virtue of their business, right? It's a silicon manufacturing company. Precision is incredibly important. But there were still places in the business where you do, in fact, have to take that risk and drive. And I think that it comes back to that question of what will it take? What would it take? And having the courage as a young leader to ask that question. Because there are many times where you circle around through the approval process, and it's tough to find out what you really need to get something launched. And if you can come back and with a very clear proposal that says, this is what we're going to do, this is the benefit, and these are the risks, and oh, by the way, this is how we'll address the risks, you can in fact move change forward. But you have to do it within the common language and the framework of the company in which you work. If it's just because it works at one company and looks one way doesn't mean it will necessarily translate. There was a big adjustment for me to go from a far less risk tolerant business to one that was willing to let me click a mouse and put something out on the job's website without a lot of oversight.
Yeah, okay, all right. There's been a lot of talk about AI changing the nature of the workforce. And to be honest, I think that's, if you really scratch at that, what people are really talking about is the infusion of technology into every job function, changing the nature of the workforce. And maybe, some technology is, smarter than others and has more ML or AI as part of it. Amazon is sort of known for being at the forefront of that. Again, so you're probably getting a glimpse of how things are going to change for the rest of us over the next couple of decades, as there's smarter and smarter machines next to our people helping them to do their jobs. What's that look like? And does it change the way you have to hire and grow people?
So I haven't got the memo on exactly what it looks like yet. So I think, so there's this very interesting conversation happening now around the future of work and robots and AI, and it bifurcates really into two paths. One is a bright and shiny future where we all work 20 hours a week. I know, I heard that memo back when PCs first launched. And then this...
I know, it's been happening for like 30 years. If you're our age, you've heard this like 4 times.
Yeah, and that whole Jetsons thing where the laundry folds itself still hasn't happened.
Yeah, exactly, right.
So that's the bright and shiny one. The other one is this dark and rusty dystopian Blade Runner, the robots are coming.
Which there are parts of the world like that right now. I'm kidding.
And I think that it's a dichotomy that forces a false choice. The reality is that the decision isn't whether technology creates or destroys jobs. It does both. The key question here, though, is the pace of upskilling. And how do we ensure that we continue to keep our workforce upskilled as technology changes? And your point, Robert, is really good. Technology now infuses every job. There is not a person in this room, I would venture a bet, that doesn't have a strong command of data and statistics. You just cannot work in the recruiting profession if you don't understand supply chain, right? What's your funnel? What does your pipeline look like? Where are you getting good candidates? What's your quality? So that, and what are the systems you use to do that? How do you integrate them? What's the reporting? And all of a sudden that technology has infused across a broad range of traditionally non-technical jobs. And so how do we ensure that we're keeping people current? And then what are we doing upstream as early as kind of that K-12 education to ensure that STEM isn't this little thing off to the side, that it's fundamentally infused into our curricula so that people understand not only what it is, but what's the practical application.
You told me some fascinating stories about your interview at Amazon that I wanted to bring into the room. Tell us about that.
So I told you, the head owner called. I came up to Seattle and interviewed on a lark. And the interview process was probably the toughest that I had done. It's behavioral based. And I basically, and again, it's give me an example of a time when you. And one would be, hey, the best solution, people say the best solutions are the simple ones. Give me an example of a complex problem you've solved with an incredibly simple solution. And then once you answer that, then the interview starts to dig in and ask for more follow-up questions. And I will tell you that in each of the interviews that I did, I eventually got to a point where somebody asked me something that I had no clue how to answer. And I had this panic, like, oh my God, I don't have any idea how to answer that question. And then I thought, maybe I didn't prepare enough, that whole kind of little narrative that goes along with it. And I said, I don't know. I don't know how I would solve it, but here's how I would approach the problem. And then we had a conversation about that piece. And when I walked out at the end of the 2 days, I called my husband and I said, look, they're never going to offer me a job based on this. But if they do, we're really gonna have a conversation about this Palm Springs things, because, man, this is a really intriguing place, because people ask me some really tough questions. And I'm not talking about, how many windows are there in Manhattan, why are street hole covers round? These were questions about, the first one I said I don't know to was, how do you ramp recruiting capacity without linearly increasing your headcount along with the business growth? And we're all wrestling with that right now, right?
And just to be clear about that, that's saying basically, how do you ramp your ability to hire without linearly ramping and hiring more recruiters?
That's right. It can't be a one-to-one, right?
Effectively, how do you make your recruiters
more efficient?
More efficient.
And boy, I wish I had the answer to that. I'd patent it.
Yeah.
But saying I don't know in an interview is it was scary for me.
It is scary, but I think it's one of the most, and this resonated with me because I think it's one of the most important things that you can share with a young leader is those 3 words are so powerful, because what they say to people around you is that you're self-aware, first off, to know that you don't know, which is a big, big deal, and that you have the courage to admit it, and that you'll go off and get an answer, which, again, I thought that resonated with me and was powerful.
We have, of the 14 leadership principles, I have 2 favorites. One is learn and be curious. The other is vocally self-critical. And it comes to that, which says you have to be willing to admit that you don't know, and also to be curious about why people think things are the way they are. It's very important, as a leader at any level, to be aware that you can shut down a room. You can shut down conversation simply by making a comment and unintentionally squelch the solution that's sitting in the room. And you're right, those 3 words draw out insight that I don't have as a leader.
Yeah. Tell me about your 5 Ps.
Prior proper planning prevents poor performance. I almost said.
I have 2 teenage sons, and I was scribbling so fast when she said these. One more time.
It's actually prior planning prevents poor performance. It's an armyism. We were talking about, Robert asked me about working at Amazon, and I have never had so much fun. I've had a handful of bad days at Amazon, and they've all been self-inflicted. And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, I took myself too seriously. I didn't listen to someone who knew a lot more than I did. I failed the 5 Ps. And he said, what are the 5 Ps? I said, prior proper planning. So.
All right. Well, why don't we go to some questions from you guys? You guys must have some great questions. Do we have, we've got mics, right?
Give me 1 second to make my way over. Can you keep your hands raised, please? Okay. You guys pass that down.
Hello.
Hi.
How do you keep employee morale with the negative publicity that Amazon's been getting about the warehouse workers?
So it's a good question. I think one of the challenges with publicity is it doesn't always reflect people's personal experience. I think genuine criticism, may never feel fair, but it's an opportunity for us as a company to inspect the way we're doing work. And we're very open and transparent with our employees about that process. That when we do receive genuine criticism, whether it's from customers or from employees, that we take a look at it, and we're very open about what we're doing well and where we have opportunity to improve, and then what we're going to do about it.
Yeah. By the way, did you know at Glassdoor there's an effect named after Amazon? There's the Amazon effect. I bet you didn't know that. Our chief economist, who just, Andrew, you just heard from him, found that this odd thing we found in the data, where there is this inverse correlation between work-life balance and CEO approval rating. Meaning, as CEO approval rating climbs, work-life balance tends to go down, which is not entirely intuitive, and you see it again and again and again. And if you go and you read the reviews, you talk to people and scratch at it, what you're finding is people know they're giving up work-life balance. It's not like a secret. And that's where the New York Times article I thought was extremely unfair, in the sense that if you talk to people, they're like, yeah, work-life balance sucks at Amazon, but that's not the point. We're on a mission. And that's what people will tell you is there's an iconic leader and a strong mission, and they're trading off their work-life balance to go on this mission with this leader. And you see it all over the place, but that's the Amazon effect.
Interesting. Okay.
All right, we have another question right here.
Hi. So you mentioned hiring for a cultural fit, and that can take a long time. I work for an organization that's largely sales, so we hire at a mass scale. We're filling 100 roles a month. Do you have any suggestions for finding good cultural fits while trying to hire such a large amount of people at one time?
So I think it's a good question. So our businesses hire thousands in a month, and part of it is having I think two pieces. One is a structured standard interview approach, and then we train everyone that interviews in that approach, so that we're using a very consistent, repeatable process. And that was new to me when I came to Amazon, which was like, what do you mean I have to go to class to learn how to interview? But it was really important because then when Robert and I are on a panel, we behave the same way, we have expectations about the questions we're going to ask, we understand how the debrief process works, and that accelerates it because it isn't always a one-off. It's basically a very repeatable process.
All right, one more over here.
So when it comes to the bar raiser program, I'm curious, like at what point or what size organization do you think it's appropriate to implement that type of program?
You mean, when does it no longer scale, or?
No, so my current organization is about 300 people. The last one I was at was around 500, and we tried to implement it. So I'm just curious, is there a smaller scale type bar raiser program, or do you see that more appropriate at a larger organization?
I think the key piece of it is what was the intention? And the intention of the bar raiser program is to ensure that we are in fact hiring for cultural fit, and that we're not compromising that concept of always raising the bar. And I think if I'm going to infer from what you asked that is there a way to do it in a scalable fashion for a smaller organization? And I think you can. I think you can look and say, and again, back to data, who are my best interviewers? Who are the people who are typically inclined on a loop, and have the people that they've been inclined on been hired and been successful? And then can I use those folks? So you don't have to go out and invent a whole bunch of mechanisms or bureaucracy around it. You can start small and use what you already have. I think that the question is, as you're growing quickly, how do you make sure that cultural assessment is consistent across a variety of interviewers?
I would add to that. So Glassdoor is about 1,000 people right now, and we're putting this program in place right now. And what happened was, when you're small, and I don't know if it's still the case at your firm, but I interviewed, I was the last interview for probably until we were 200 or 300 people.
That's right.
Frequently that's the CEO or a co-founder, or there's like a group of 2 or 3 people that are on almost every interview loop. And I think what inadvertently happened with us was at about 300 to 400 people, that just became not feasible. And so from 400 to 1,000, we haven't had that, and we're feeling the pain of it now. And so I would argue that it's around the time when you no longer have a de facto bar raiser program because you have this small group of people on every interview loop, you better introduce one. And it can be a heavy burden, but I would say, I would advise, 8 to 10 people that carry the culture, so that no one has to do more than a couple interviews as a bar raiser, per week or something like that. But I would do it if you're at that phase.
And that's what drove it at Amazon, frankly. It was, hey, how do we make sure, because the leadership team has to lead. And if they're spending, as the company grows, if you're spending all your time interviewing, you can't, but you don't want to let go of it because you don't want to compromise the culture.
Right, and you have to formalize it
Right.
because it probably was informal before. It was informal for us. It was like we knew what we wanted, and yeah.
Yes, in the middle.
You talked about upscaling and raising the bar. For entry-level positions, some of your warehouse positions, are you applying that same tactic there? I mean, we hire a lot of entry-level positions, 100,000 a year, and that's really hard to do at that level. So I'm just curious how you're implementing that.
just going to repeat the question for the stream.
Yeah, so I think your question is, and if I got it wrong, correct me, is how do we apply the bar raising concept at our entry level warehouse positions, and then two, how do we address upskilling in that population? I think those were your two questions. So the first one is that bar raiser concept is not as integrated into that process because, to your point, that is hiring at scale. Rather, we're looking for, through an assessment process, do folks look like a cultural fit? But there is not a bar raiser per se in that process. In terms of upskilling, we focus on our hourly population with an innovative program called Career Choice that's focused specifically on training for in-demand roles in the communities where our facilities are located that pay more than we do. And so we worked with the Bureau of Labor and Statistics to identify those positions. We work with local providers like community colleges to bring programs in-house. And the goal there is really to remove the friction that stands between an associate and upskilling. And then those programs typically are most popular on just kind of these stackable micro-credentials. So, for example, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area right now, 1 in 6 jobs is in aerospace. And so upskilling employees and qualifying them for jobs in the aerospace industry opens up a wide variety of roles for them, that wouldn't have been available to them otherwise.
I found this fascinating when you mentioned this earlier to me. Amazon knowingly and intentionally invests a ton of money in educating their employees out of their jobs at Amazon.
Some of them stay within Amazon. This is for Career Choice. Again, it's focused specifically on our hourly population. And in that Dallas-Fort Worth example, people say, oh, it must be philanthropy. It's got nothing to do with philanthropy. I mean, frankly, if I'm in Dallas-Fort Worth and there's a demand for advanced manufacturing technicians, and I can create a talent pipeline to fill those jobs, a couple things happen. First, I move an employee up the wage scale. So our average wage in the United States is $15, including bonuses, stock, and then in addition to that, associates we have egalitarian benefits. So everybody has the same health care benefits, the same generous parental leave programs, et cetera. But the entry-level wage for an advanced manufacturing technician in Dallas is about $23 an hour. So if I move somebody from that average of 15 to 23, that's a life-changing step up the wage scale, and I'm moving someone onto a path into that middle-class space, and it's an entree to a career. So I'm filling that pipeline, I'm moving into somebody up the wage scale, and a couple things happen. Other companies come into the Dallas-Fort Worth area because they know that they can get the talent that they need. The average wage level in the community raises, and those people who work for us continue to be customers. And it's this virtuous flywheel that just makes good business sense, particularly as a retailer.
Does it end up being a key recruitment benefit too?
It is. For associates who work with us, it's an opportunity to come in and access training and education that they either may not have had access to, or to upskill because they have a degree or a credential that doesn't map to what's available in the local community.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
All right, we have time for one last question back here.
Thank you. Good morning. My question is, do you use any type of assessment in the recruiting process, and what roles would you use that for?
So the assessments that we use, we use technical assessments for a number of our software roles. Our cloud support associates, cloud support engineers have assessments. We use assessments for our fulfillment center associates, and it's really all driven around improving the fidelity of the funnel. Because again, back to that supply chain analogy, what I really want to do is anyone who's coming in my recruitment funnel, I want a high yield, right? I want candidates coming in so that when I get them to whether it's phone screen or on-site interview, that I've got a high conversion rate. And so the better I do at that front end of the funnel, the more efficient my recruitment process is across the company.
All right, well, thank you so much for
Thank you.
spending time with us this morning. This has been incredibly educational and fun too. So how about a quick round of applause and thank you for being here.
Thank
Thank you. So good.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much to Ardeen and Robert. We are going to take a little caffeine break here. So please join us back at 11 a.m. Central, and we'll be joined by Johnson & Johnson, who's talking about the rubber meeting the road between what job seekers feel before they enter the company. See you back shortly.